really nice to talk about food while everybody's eating. That feels like it's right. So we don't have to imagine food. Picture food. Try to imagine food in your mouth, in your belly. Try to imagine sitting with other people eating food. Now, you don't have to imagine very much. Food. What I wanted to do tonight is to start with the idea that food is a lot more than that stuff on your plate or in your bowl. That the food that we share is relationships. Relationships to each other, relationships to our cultures, relationships across generations, relationships to the seasons, relationships to our microbiomes, relationships to the physicality of working the soil, relationship to water, relationship to time, relationship to the past, relationship to the future. So when we talk about food and what is or isn't good for you, or what the human unit needs, how many units of protein, or how many units of calories, or how many units of carbs, or how many units of vitamin A or D or C, or these are very extracted reductionisms. And yet they're so appealing. Okay, we have, if you will, an appetite for that kind of information. And yet, that's not the food. People don't eat nutrition. They eat meals. And what happens at a meal is a little bit about the food and the health and the strength that comes from the land around you or from wherever into your body. But it's also about the conversation that takes place at the table. It's about the room that we share. It's about who you can be in this room. How you can be. And the way you feel in your system, in your nervous system. Are you breathing quickly? Are your shoulders up on your ears, or are they warm and lowering? Where are you? In your intellect? Where are you in your emotions? Where are you in your body, in your culture? And there's so much communication happening here. Right? Even in the recipe for the soup. In the soup with the creme fraiche and the soup that's vegan, we have a lot of cultural information. What's happening with us? How are we beginning to perceive differently how to be in relationship to each other and to food? What's in that communication? So, I once attended a very, very disturbing week-long session of very important people. And believe me, I was an afterthought. I don't know why they invited me, because the people that were there were the ministry of such and such, and the defense system of this country, and the big scary people, the military people, the hospital people, the emergency aid people. And they got together in this completely posh castle in Italy, up in the lake, the mountain lake district, to talk about the emergency of global food supplies. This is a little surreal, don't you think? So these people flew in from all over the world, and they sat and they had dinner on tablecloths every night with wine from France, and the food was actually not good. Just as a side comment. Because food that is good is made with a kind of care and affection for life. And it doesn't really matter what you've got to cook with. It matters that you care. Anyway, so in this week-long workshop session, there were very important people making very important mathematical decisions about what to do in times of food supply breakdown and how to create food pods to distribute to millions of people. What could possibly go wrong? Well, of course, food pods might be nutrition, but they're not food. And what a food pod is, a little box of nutritional, I don't know, matter, is a representation of a misperception. It's a breaking of those relationships. There is a huge violence in the concept of a food pod. Now, I understand if you have millions of people in hunger that you have to feed them. I'm not blind to that. But what I'm saying is, in the process of doing that, don't break the relationships. It's very important that parents make food for their children. If the government is handing out little boxes of nutrition, that relationship is breaking. It's very important that people have some sort of relationship to their cultural traditions in relationship to food, right? So coming to Sweden from the States, it's rough around my house at Christmas because I find it super duper difficult to imagine having a bunch of cold fish for Christmas dinner. No, 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 no. That will not do. And my husband can't imagine not having cold fish for Christmas dinner. So we have a lot of extra food. But these things are difficult to change, and they're more difficult than you might imagine. So when there is a thought of how do we change systemic process, okay, what is systems transformation in terms of food? Watch out, because changing those deep expectations of relationship to food is not just about food. And if you start to tell people how to think, how to feel, how to act, how to live, how to eat, you will get revolution. You won't get fed people. So coming back to what is food? And when we're tending to food, what are we tending to? Because it's not just nutrition. So there was a couple of things I wanted to read to you. And the first is a recipe, because we're talking about food, so we should read recipes. But this is a recipe. If culture makes food, so too does food make culture. Okay? So this is a recipe for cupcakes of complicit confusion. All right? Complicit, we're in this together, confusion. This is a recipe for cupcakes of complicit confusion. Okay, first, preheat the culture to broiling competition and individualism. Next, grease the pan with 70 years of banal media entertainment to be sure that rigorous thought won't stick. Third, crack the eggs of mutual respect for each other and the natural world. Beat until fragmentation is complete. Add a dash of military-industrial complex, Mercer and Murdoch, to centuries of colonial violence. Fold in a pinch of Cambridge Analytica and/or aggregate IQ, simmer until cultural fissures thicken to conspiracies solid enough to sink the real conspiracies to the bottom of the pot. If you can find a pandemic to add to the mix, this can be particularly emulsifying for creating a golden, crispy, trillionaire crust. Bake for 700 years in the oven of mechanistic metaphors. Frosting, sugar, and dreams of material wealth and ownership. Decorate with surrealism, and remember, nothing rises in the cultural cake without something like a garnish of weird. Serve with religion and agriculture. As mammals, the survival of our species is really contingent on essentially one thing, and that one thing is everything. That one thing is that we feed the next generation. That's it. That's what mammals do. You feed the next generation. Feed the babies. That's what we have to do. And in order to feed the babies, there has to be a recognition that the mamas and the papas and the aunties and the uncles and the family and the community has to be fed. And to feed them means they have to be able to feed the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. There must be clean water to make it possible to feed the babies. There must be clean air. We must have the oceans be healthy. We must have the soils. There must be education. There must be gender respect. There must be well-being. There must be something that goes beyond poverty, that allows people to live in dignity and health as they feed their babies. And in this sense, this notion of how do we feed the babies is actually the whole question. It's the whole thing. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them in a row, and you look at the image of a mother nursing her baby, all of the development goals are there, every single one. So that I would like to offer you for a moment as an image that shows a type of thinking that needs to change, a type of perception that needs to change. Right? So we can look around the world and say, okay, here's a problem, there's a problem, here's a problem, there's a problem, and we can create committees to deal with this problem and big budgets to deal with that problem, and sometimes we can get super good at gathering a few of them together, and we call it systemic. But still, that thinking, the perception, right? My dad once said, the major problems in the world are the difference between the way nature works and the way people think. And as long as we're looking for isolated, decontextualized, linear strategies to solve a food problem, guess what we are going to do? We're going to perpetuate or make worse all the problems we have. And at the same time, all the best intention in the world is there. So, how do you do this? What does it look like? Where is this shift? Because there is no department of nursing, there is no department of feed the babies. There is no policy that would cover all of those different contexts, right? Because this is emotional. This is intellectual contact. This is communication and learning across generations. William Blake once said that a tear is an intellectual thing. A tear is an intellectual thing. And I know you know that I know that you know that a tear is an emotional thing, right? A tear is a physical thing. A tear is communication. A tear happens in relationship to an idea. A tear is an intellectual thing. A tear is a little bit of salt water that comes when the Swedish wind hits my California eyes, and I can't figure out, it just doesn't seem very useful to make water come out of your eyes when it's -7 outside. I cannot figure this out. I keep asking my husband, why does this happen? Why do my eyes water when it's freezing outside? A tear is an intellectual thing. And I wanted to share that with you because a tear, like food, like every aspect of life, is actually wound into so many different processes. There's been this research recently, maybe you heard about it, about how domestic violence goes down with men who smell their partner's tears. I keep wondering, like, how did they capture the tears? And, like, what's happening there? But again, there it is. There are things happening that we don't know. There are relationships and communication processes that make life. When we talk about food, we're talking about life. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about being in relationship with each other and the living world in a way that makes more life. Right? How does this relationship that makes life make more life that makes life that makes life? The word consume, I looked it up, and in the English word consume. In my understanding of it, it was sort of like what happens when you have a glass of water here and then the glass of water is here, that you have consumed it, right? But to my great surprise, I looked up the word consume. Let's see if I can find it on a whim. You'll be shocked. I was shocked. Maybe you won't be shocked, but I was shocked. The word consume. Wait. Just a second. It should be right here. Okay. Hold on. This is my new book, and so I don't know where anything is in it yet. We're still finding each other. Okay. Consume. Definition number 1, to destroy by separating into parts which cannot be reunited. That is the definition of consume. To separate into parts, to destroy by separating into parts that cannot be reunited. So I think we need to rethink some things. Very seriously, what does it look when a baby is nursing? They are nursing. There's a lot of relationship, but by that definition, they are not consuming milk. Isn't that interesting? So what do we mean when we talk about eating or appetites? What are you craving? What does that mean to have a desire for? And what's informing those desires? What are those appetites? Somehow that's involved with food. I want to read you another poem. Because I think part of what we're talking about is looking at food and our relationship with food as an ecology of relationships. It's not just one relationship. It's many things happening simultaneously. And when you taste a new food and you think, this tastes like something I know. Or you taste a new food and you think, I don't understand this flavor. I don't know where this is coming from. I remember the first time I was in Asia, and the host family that I was staying with, they gave me dried squid for breakfast, and I had a hangover. And I thought, no, no, this isn't a good idea. But why not? Where does that repulsion come from? But you all understood. But if I were to say, okay, and the other night my husband said, and we should have sill for dinner, and I was like, yeah, but it's -7. Why are we having cold food? And he said, because we should have sill. I said, no, we should have stew. We should have something warm. These appetites, these acclamations, these things are running so deeply through us. And how is that perception changing? What does it look like when that perception shifts? And one thing I wanted to bring into that, that notion of an ecology. Food is an ecology, not just because it grows in the ground and things that grow in the ground are ecological, but because you are an ecology of organisms, 400 trillion organisms. Did you know that 1/10 of your cells are human? Ah, it's 1/10. So who's hungry? Is it you? Is it your organisms? Who craves that sugar? Who craves caffeine? Who's doing that? I have a kombucha mushroom at home. Do any of you have those kombucha mushrooms? And what do you feed it? Caffeine and sugar. That's what it eats. Isn't that interesting? So those microbiomes are right there. Whenever human beings get together, and what do? We have some caffeine and sugar. Care for a little fika? And is that for you, or is it for your candida? Who's having lunch today? Where is the perception? And when we're tending to this question of how we feed the babies, we're tending to a lot more than a simple bottle of baby food. I met a woman who had been part of making a film. And the film was about genetically modified foods. And so you might imagine what the story was. And she was from Africa. And they were bringing the GMOs into their world to increase the possibility to solve the problem of starvation by actually creating a monoculture of food. They did not understand the ecology of food. They understood the problem. Here's the problem, find a solution. The major problems in the world are the difference between the way people think and the way nature works. This is how people think. Solve the problem of starvation, add food. But that's not how you do that. And so they came in and they brought the genetically modified foods, and that meant that there were all of these new equipments and everybody's roles changed. And the seeds, she said, when she was a little girl and she went to the fields with her mama, they had a song. And her mama pulled the seed out of the bag and put it in her mouth to get it wet and gave it to her daughter to put in the ground. And the food in the mouth and the daughter and the ground. And the food in the mouth and the daughter and the ground. There was a rhythm and a song and a movement in the season, in the relationship between the generations. They were making the food together. The future, the past, the food in the mouth and the seed in the ground. And then came the genetically modified seeds. Well, you can't touch them with your hands because the fertilizers that are on them are so toxic that you can't even touch them, let alone put them in your mouth. So you don't put them in the ground with your child and the mouth and the seed and the song is gone. It goes into the ground with a machine. And then that moment when the mother and the daughter would have been together in the fields, the daughter is somewhere needing childcare. Not in relationship to the season, not in relationship to the song. A tear is an intellectual thing. A seed is an ecological thing. An ecology of emotion, an ecology of possibilities. And then when they harvest the food, it's all in one place and it's all one kind of food. And all the other relationships got broken. The relationships with the people who make the baskets to transport the food from household to household, from village to village, because these people grew corn and those people grew rice and these people had veggies and those ones, right, had beans. So the basket making got forgotten. And then the relationship between the genders got all screwed up because the machines that were doing the work that the men used to do went too fast. And the work that the women did was still slow. So the men had all of this free time to get drunk. Okay, so then she's standing there with a plate full of food and she says, "What I have on this plate, this is not food. It looks like food. It might even taste somewhat like food, but this is not food. The production of this broke every relationship that food makes. Consuming, destroying by breaking relationships that cannot be put back together again." So how might we begin to take this broken world? Let's don't pretend that it's all groovy and one and there's unity and that the oneness is just there. We broke it pretty good. It's like the teapot that fell on the ground and is in 1,000 pieces now. How do we begin to hold relationships that are broken in a way that they can find each other again? Now, this is an art. Because if you say this relationship goes with that relationship, goes with this relationship, goes with that relationship, guess what you just did? You just broke them again. So you don't get to be in control of it. You don't get to make a linear solution because the relationships are not linear. They have to be alive. That's a really hard thing. That's a really hard thing. That's the difference between the mother nursing her baby. Those are relationships that go through multiple contexts. That's political, that's economic, that's the soil, that's the air, that's the right, that's the whole deal. In one gesture of love and care. So we've got some work to do to even begin to be as elegant as that. But that shifting of perception, where we're coming in and not asking what is, okay, when we talk about first order is where you have a problem and you think you can make a solution, right? So there's starvation, so we send GMO seeds because we're going to make food, because the problem is that there's not enough food. But that is actually not the issue, right? The issue is that a lot of relationships with the season, with the water, have been broken due to industry, due to all kinds of other things. So come in and ask, how do we tend the relationships so that that food is a consequence? How do we tend the relationships that make food? Ooh, that's going to take some doing. We're not used to thinking like that. We're not used to thinking like that. That's a kind of possibility that works in a different way. That's what systemic work looks like, by the way. If if you want systems transformation, you don't get to pick which things you solve. You have to make a space where the things can be in relationship, and those relationships can move and come alive, and make relationships that come alive. Okay, this poem. I want to read you this poem because it has to do with something called synesthesia. Synesthesia is where you have senses and you cross them. Okay? We do this all the time. It's how we make sense of our world. That's why, stop signs are red. It's when we talk about, there's a million ways that we do this. But one thing about synesthesia is that it allows us to make sense through multiple sensory processes. And this is good exercise for ecological thinking. Okay, so there was a famous composer named Scriabin. You might know about Scriabin. And Scriabin saw the music. He saw colors. There's a lot of people who are mathematics savants who see numbers either as music or colors, or so their sensory inputs are crossing. It sounds like a disease, right? Synesthesia. It sounds like amnesia, or one of those things that isn't good for you. But actually, it's really interesting. And very often we have this in art, okay? You have something that is eliciting a different response. So this piece is called The Caramels of Autumn, and I invite you to pay attention to the different ways of perceiving. I wrote this poem. I live out on Munse, on Ekerö, and in the autumn, there's these fields out there, and there's these birch trees. And when they till the fields, there's this chunky mud. And then the birch trees are changing colors, and the maples and the oaks. So this is very much Ekerö here. Butterscotching birch trees and honeying maples. In their confection, perfection, for a few soft taffy hours. They cherry in candied red at the forest edges. The landscape is sugar-shined in dampness. Tilled wet earth as heavy as acres of chunky melted chocolate waits. Apple green grass glows in sour, snappy light, while cola bark oak trunks and branches gum and crunch. Milky Earl Grey sky pours from porcelain, so Saturday sweet. So I wanted to read that to you because I wanted you to, as we think about food, to remember your membership. Remember your membership. Your membership in this life, in the aliveness of life, requires your imagination. It requires your poetry. It requires your culture, your ceremony. It requires songs. To make a food pod in an emergency situation is not to save lives. So being very, very careful, what are we doing in those emergency situations? How do you meet an emergency without breaking everything? I'm going to stop there. Thank you. I have a few more minutes, and I thought if you had anything you wanted to say or ask or provoke or anything, that I would be very open to that. Don't be shy, but I might answer you with a poem. You have been warned. I love to cook. I have 2 of my own children and 4 of my husband's, and our table is a place where there is always life. Food is where we come together.
3 dogs.
Yes, and 3 dogs. Yes. Food is where we come together. Yeah.
Well, I came to think of when you talked about a paradise built in hell. You know about it, discussing the what happened after the earthquake in San Francisco and how some people started to build things, and that those people afterwards say that after all, this was kind of the best part of my life, what they built up there. And then maybe you know about this book.
Well, I've been in a couple of earthquakes in San Francisco myself. And one of the things that happened, I was actually in Santa Cruz when a big earthquake hit, which is sort of down. There was a big Loma Prieta. Remember the earthquake where the Bay Bridge fell in I think it was 89 or something. I think you might be talking about the big one in 19, yeah. Yeah. But it was really interesting because the earth shook for 15 seconds. And in 15 seconds, there was no power, no water, no banks, no gas stations, no schools, it was gone. Everything we knew about civilization took 15 seconds to level. And what did we have then? We had each other. And it happened so fast. People slept outside because one thing that you don't know about earthquakes, if you've lived in them, is that there's aftershocks, and the aftershocks are sometimes even stronger than the earthquake, but they're faster. And in that moment, there was this, real upheaval, but people began to organize, and they began to figure it out, and they began to share things, and they found ways of filtering water, and they cared for each other's children, and it happened fast. And then when everything started to get up and running again, as time went on, like you said, there was this nostalgia for those weeks when we had to be human with each other. We had to be there for each other. And that sense of connectivity and of interdependence was something to long for, even though it came in a state of chaos. And I think that's what happened in 1904, 6, I don't know.
In a very much smaller way, I can remember we live at the end of a small road, and there was a case when a truck went into the ditch, so no one gets in or out. And I was on the way out, and there was nothing to do to stop. And very soon we had this gathering of neighbors around there, and we immediately understand we don't get anywhere. So this situation we start talking to each other, and they have quite a good time. So this tends to happen when we are in some way get forced to stop, just stop, slow down.
And I think you guys are about to do a warm data lab, and you're going to get to do it in Swedish. So I'm not going to interrupt you, but I will come in after, and I have something to read to you. But I think this work, that is this warm data work, is really tending to those possibilities for making relationship in times of need. Can we improvise together when we need to? And one of the things we have right now is our societies, our communities are fed all these binaries all the time. What political side are you on? What's your religion? Are you us? Are you them? Are you this? Are you that? And are you for it or against it? Where do you stand on the war in Gaza? Like, because I need to know if I like you or not. Right? And none of the questions, none of the struggles that communities and families and individuals and nations, none of the things we are facing in our polycrisis, metacrisis, are binary. All of them have thousands of sides to them. So being able to meet these crises together requires a kind of practice. It requires practice in perceiving the complexity, perceiving these multiple contexts that are engaging. And that practice is nice when it's intellectual, that's cool, but it's even more potent when it has to do with your own memories and your own life. So that's sort of what you're going to be doing in a minute. So, but you had a question, yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is about learning to perceive interdependence. Because I feel like this has to do with perception. And I don't feel like I perceive interdependence so much. When I look at you, I don't see the 10 or dozens of contexts that are holding you up. Or when I speak to you, I don't perceive the myriads of possibilities that are being activated. So where do you go to learn to perceive interdependence?
To interdependence school, clearly. You have to take a workshop. No, it takes practice. And you have to understand that practice is pretty punk rock. Because it's actually going to run in rebellion to a great deal of your habituated capabilities of participating in the world you know of as normal. You will start to become uncomfortable. You'll be feeling like, wait a minute, this is bullshit. And it is. And somehow you still have to live in it. So be careful what you ask for. Because once you see it, then you have to see it and still live in it. But that's, I think for me, that's been one of the things the Warm Data Lab has really been about. And it's subtle. Because if you jam it down someone's throat, here's all the contexts, memorize them. What you need is this big spreadsheet. That doesn't go. It doesn't, what is needed is to be able to, perceive is a good word. See is a little weak because you have to smell the complexity. You have to taste it, right? You have to, what's the texture of this relationship? One of the exercises I love to do with people is to get them to, in some way, draw or express some sort of complex system. And where all the relationships are, instead of drawing little lines like mom, dad, aunt, tree, right? That you have to actually draw the relationship. What does the relationship look like? Is it spiky? Is it blue? Is it sticky? Is it yellow? Does it swirl? What's in this relationship? But we are not trained to perceive in that way. We are not trained. So those moments where you are, you have the option to practice that perception actually all day, every day. You can start with your blue jeans. Where did they come from? Why do I wear them? Who made them? Where was the ink made? How did they get delivered here? Who designed the tires for the trucks? What was the process in which I began to think that I needed to wear these blue jeans because they signify a particular set of messages? Right? Where are the blue jeans? Are they cultural messages? Are they cotton from Uzbekistan? So the possibility for that practice is everywhere. But dipping into it, you need to do, guess what? In relationship, in communication with others. Yeah. Yeah. Good question, though. Yeah. Anybody else? I have to go. One more? Super quick. Okay, we're good? Is there one more? I don't see one more.
No.
I think we're okay. All right, you guys, have a great warm data lab. I'm going to come back after and bring you something else. Thank you so much.